Good afternoon, and welcome to the ISR Distinguished Speaker talk. And I'm so pleased to welcome Andrew Campbell as our speaker. So Andrew is the Albert Bradley 1915 3rd century professor of computer science at Dartmouth, which is a very anachronistic name, right? I couldn't figure out the 1915 3rd century awarded in 2019. So Andrew co-directs the DartNets lab. He came to Dartmouth via Columbia, did his PhD at Lancaster University. Andrew does the most interesting work and is really at the top of his field in mobile technologies, right? Mobile sensing technologies. I have had the great pleasure to collaborate with Andrew for the last few years. We have a very large project. A fun fact about Andrew before he begins. He left school at 16 and worked in a zoo. So you can ask him about that after the talk. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. It is wonderful to be here. It's been a long time since I was here, but I know it was in the last 20 years, and I know that Mesh nailed my ass with a question at the end of the last talk, so I have to watch it today. It's great to see a lot of old friends here. It's fantastic. And it's lovely to actually come and visit Gloria. Gloria is one of the leads on a large IARPA project where we're looking at workplace performance. It's been a lot of fun to work with Gloria, I've known for a number of years. I won't be talking about that today because we have not looked into sort of the mental health aspects of that, but it's a cool study where we followed 750 people for 1 year in 3 different industries to look at how well they performed in the workplace. Anyway, I'd like to talk about the future of mental health sensing. And I had this little byline. In the abstract, it was a call to, what was it? Call to arms. And I felt that was a bit too militaristic. So we've got a call to action. And I'll explain what I mean by that as I go on. So if I'm going to talk about the future, then I've got to start in the past for me. And in 2005, I was on sabbatical at Cambridge University. Fantastic place to spend a year. Excellent beer in Cambridge, if you like beer. And I got an invitation out of the blue. At that time, I was working, like a lot of people, on sensor networks, which were these tiny devices built at Berkeley, called motes. And funnily enough, there were lots and lots of people working on sensor networks. It was very much a sort of systems sort of initiative. And few people were working on sensing. Everybody was working on networking, the wireless communication between these modes. Like no one was doing sensing, and everyone was working on sensor networks. So I got this invitation from Nokia to attend an internal workshop in Kusamo, which is, as you can see, up near the Arctic Circle. And Nokia made us sign an NDA, and there was maybe about 15 academics and about 20 internal researchers and some management there from Nokia. Remember Nokia, that great European company that went down the drain? They used to, I don't know if you remember, you're all a bit too young, but they used to be these flip phones thingies, these small little phones Nokia made. But so Nokia brought us there, and Nokia showed us in 2005 essentially a smartphone with prototype applications running on it that did sort of M-healthy type things, you know, activity stuff. And the great shock with Nokia was that their senior management thought nobody would spend $500 on a phone, right? And so they didn't build it, and essentially they disappeared, right? They're back now. So when I came back from that meeting and then came back to Dartmouth in 2006, I completely changed my research area. That one meeting at Nokia blew me away. And I moved away from wireless communications between devices to look at sensing on devices. And in 2006, Peter Boda, who was one of the leaders of the Nokia research at this workshop, came to visit me, and he provided some funding to do some research. And we were sitting around in my lab, and Peter said to me, he gave me a bunch of phones called the N, wasn't this one, this is an N95, N60, an N60. He said, Andrew, there's an accelerometer in that phone. I said, what? He said, because they weren't actually using the accelerometer in the phone. They hadn't activated it. And they put it there because, you know, they just wanted to flip between, in N60 is very similar to this, between portrait and landscape, but they figured no one would use it. And I said, Peter, give me that API. And I got access to that API, and we started to implement algorithms on that phone. Up until then, I'd moved to like build some small scale devices that talk to the phone to actually do, you know, activity recognition and those sorts of things. So we actually had a phone, finally, that actually had an embedded sensor in it. And of course, with embedded sensors, we can do lots of things. And, you know, for example, it seems really boring right now, but, you know, accelerometer, you can just eyeball this thing, right? And we implemented a classifier on the N60 to do activity recognition. We did some really cool things as well. We implemented voice activity detection on this N60 feature phone. It was not a smartphone. And basically it looked at 6 bands and extracted sort of spectral features and computed the log likelihood of whether in the sample there was voice or noise. And so we used that to determine if a person was around conversation. So, you know, high-level classifier, which was implemented above the VAD, the voice activity detector, determined if a conversation had started and if it had ended. So we could easily determine by just on the phone how many conversations you were around per day and their duration. Of course, that really fitted in nicely with what was to come in terms of mental health sensing, because this sort of number of conversations you're around per day that the microphone is just eavesdropping on, by the way, not looking at content, is related to social engagement or isolation, right, which comes into play with, particularly with mental health. 2007, of course, Steve Jobs did his thing, and the iPhone appeared, and Nokia went down the plug hole. Interesting, 2008, this is the HTC Dream. So this was produced by the computing industry, and this was the first Android phone produced by the cellular industry, right? And you can see that night and day, right? One knew what it was doing, the others didn't know what they were doing, right? And 2008, the App Store opened up, and we were really fortunate that we ported what we called SenseMe, which was this application that did this embedded sensing, ran simple classifiers such as activity recognition and the voice activity detector on the phone. We ported it to the iPhone, and we got a developer's license. We got a developer's license from Apple. So Apple had a raffle, and we actually won one of the developer's licenses. So we released SenseMe when the App Store opened up in 2008, and it was one of 20 social media applications. We did a startup, it failed. So in the progression of sensors, we started to think about, and many of the ideas that we've implemented on phones have came from students, but this actually was my idea. So occasionally I do have ideas. And I said to students, the phone should know how long we sleep for without actually telling it, setting an alarm or doing this stuff. It knows, right? And so we use simple linear regression, looking at features to do with movement, sound features, light features, and phone usage. And using sort of simple linear regression, we could estimate sleep duration plus or minus 30 minutes, which you might say is an unreasonable amount of error, but if you're interested in the changes in sleep patterns, then it's perfectly good. So today, actually, these sleep classifiers are actually embedded in iPhones, and I know for a fact that Google have implemented this because I spent a year at Google recently, but they haven't actually found a use case for this yet, a usage case for this yet. So your phone knows how much you're sleeping without you actually ever interacting with it. Not only that, but it actually knows interrupted sleep, right? How much you're using the phone during the night when you're supposed to be sleeping. In 2011, Tanzeen Chowdhury joined Dartmouth, and I had a very sort of healthy collaborative relationship with Tanzeen, and we developed this application that I still love to this day. And we started working with HCI people, and we implemented this sort of animation on the back screen of the phone. So when you unlock the phone, you saw this animation. And what this animation did, it tied sensing to something that was visible. So, for example, the clownfish here represented how much physical activity I did through the day. And, you know, if it was doing flips, I was doing a lot of activities. If it was sluggish, you know, it meant I was doing little activity. The blue fish around the clownfish represented the amount of social engagement and conversation I was engaged in that day. So the more conversation I was interacting with people, the more blue fish around me, the fewer conversation, the fewer blue fish. And the back screen of the light, the actual blue that you can see here, was associated with the amount of sleep that you had. So if you slept more, it was bright. If you didn't sleep so much, it was darker. And we did a user study on this at the hospital, and these medical students just loved this shit. They were showing each other everyone's clownfish every day and how many blue fish were around it. It was just like blew my mind. Anyway, released it on the released this through Android. Tried another startup, failed. But the cool thing about this was that not only did we tie sensors to something visual, but we also, a clinical doctor on this study, Bewell, came up with some very simple interventions that would fire off to the user. It's again automated on the phone through different thresholding through sensors. So, you know, for example, you need a good night's sleep, or call a good friend, or how about going to a movie? Just small little things. Probably the only sort of intervention work that I've ever really done. That was 2011. And of course, all of this is simply running sort of machine learning algorithms on the phone, right? And just extracting using raw sensor data, extracting features, and building sort of regressors or classifiers. And of course, things have really changed a lot recently, but in the sort of shallow model pipelines of YOR, a lot of effort is spent on, or a lot of human effort is spent on handcrafting features, right? So in the case of speech, that might be MSCCs, or it could be, in the case of location, it could be location entropy, or in the case of like phone usage, it could be some index associated with screen time, right? And then the actual learning algorithms are remarkably simple and mostly linear. Of course, that's all changed today with deep models, right? Where we feed raw sensing features, raw sensing data into the model, and the hidden layer is essentially doing some convex interpretation of this data, and then we're getting some figure out the other end. And of course, the wonderful thing about this is that we get much higher performance. There's no handcrafting features, but we're losing interpretability of what's actually happening. And if you're working in the clinical world, you can't just give a clinician, you know, the area under the curve is point A. They want to know why. What is the sort of contextual information that might be around, say, some classification or some prediction? So there are pros and cons of deep models. And of course, deep models have been used widely for speech, for NLP, for object recognition with images and video, but haven't really been used widely yet in terms of time series mobile sensing data. So if you look at the smartphones today, whether it's an Android phone or an iPhone, activity recognition is there, right? And one really cool thing, again, about working at Google was to quite understand how they took some of these ideas that, I'm not claiming that we invented activity recognition at all, but came from the research community and really hardened it, right? And the reason that they got amazing performance, because, you know, I walk very differently from my mother, God bless her, she died last year. You know, she walked very differently from me, and I walk very differently from my 20-year-old son, right? But Google got so much data, trained data, that they could actually get very high performance across a general population where people all walk and run and cycle differently. And that's pretty cool. And that's because they nailed it before they scaled it. We nailed it by looking at small-scale studies, and then Google scaled it because they had the data. And I'll come back to this issue of nailing it before we scale it. Okay, I'm going to sort of like change. So that's a little background of how I got to this point in time with my work. And I want to sort of change topics by saying nobody in this room, or everyone in this room, I'm going to say, everyone in this room has been touched by mental illness one way or another. It could be you yourself. It could be somebody in your family. It could be a neighbor. It could be a co-worker, right? Somebody you know. And this is my brother Edward, and he's playing cricket here. the Americans in the audience, cricket is a little bit like baseball, but it's much better. much more interesting. And Ed was quite a good cricket player. But one of the things that Ed was, when he was 18 actually, in his first year at Durham University, he had his first depressive episode and literally dropped out of university. In fact, I actually had to go and get him out of a police station after his first episode. And it really blindsided the whole family because he was a sort of straight A kid, could do everything so easily. And I grew up sharing a room with him. I knew him intimately. And he would always say to me, Andrew, I'm smarter and I'm better looking than you. And he was right. He was a funny guy. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and it really wrecked his life. And sadly, like 9 years ago, he took his own life, which, you know, is sort of sad. But, you know, it's a product of a serious mental illness like bipolar disorder. And of course, when we think about mental illness, I'm a computer scientist. I am not a clinician. I am not a psychologist. I mean, I don't know too much about mental health, but I can tell you, if I ever met my brother, I knew exactly where he was on his cycle, either manic or depressive or healthy. I instantaneously knew, right, as a human being, knowing him well. And of course, you know, mental illness typically impacts people's ability to think. It sort of impacts behavior, and it certainly has a huge impact on mood, right? And there's a whole sort of class of mental illnesses from, you know, clinical depression, which impacts about 350 million people in the world, bipolar disorder, which is characterized, as I said, by manic and depressive episodes. And if you ever have met somebody who's in a manic phase of bipolar disorder, you'll notice that they could be quite irritable, there could be sort of pressure of speech, they're saying things that don't make sense, their sleep is completely off. And of course, then there's other serious mental health illnesses, such as schizophrenia, which is an umbrella illness, really a sort of catch-all for psychosis in particular. People who may experience both auditory or visual hallucinations or have a sense of grandeur, right? And schizophrenia impacts only 1% of the population, but it has the biggest impact on the medical healthcare system. So mental illness cannot be cured. It can only be treated through therapy or medication or combination of both. So fast forward 30 years, and I started to think to myself, the kids in the classes that I was teaching, you know, what is going on? You know, we're having sort of higher dropout rates. Who are the kids that are going to succeed in my class? Who are the kids that are going to fail? Who are the kids going to struggle? And I started looking into the sort of institutional data at Dartmouth, and it really sort of amazed me. And this is a bit old, from 2018. So 18% of the kids at Dartmouth are diagnosed with anxiety disorders. In 2016, 19% of were diagnosed with depression, 12%. And this is not just Dartmouth, this is across our campuses, which if you are teachers, literally 1 in 3 of the kids in your class are having some mental illness issues. So in 2013, I was chatting to some students. I had great fun with UCI students at lunch today. They're a terrific bunch. I was telling them how the first study, which I did in 2013, to get under the hood with what's going on in the class, and I know we've probably got some ethicists in this room, but may have been slightly unethical. I did have an IRB. There was a consent form, but all the kids that I recruited into this study were all in my own class, where I was teaching Android programming, right? So I was like, you want to sign up to the study? Consent for this? And 70 kids signed up and 48 kids finished the study. I've learned a lot since then from that first study. And the system that we built, which I won't go into sort of plumbing because it's a little bit boring maybe, but we ran a bunch of classifiers on the phone to do activity recognition, conversational interaction, estimate sleep, looking at sort of location. We had a bunch of self-reports. We asked them a lot of questions every day over the 10-week term. We did a pre and post set of surveys to look at sort of mental health, stress, loneliness, and things like that. And then we collected all this on the back end, and we did a statistical analysis on mental health, academic performance, behavioural trends. And I want to just share some of these insights with you. Caveat. What I'm presenting here is the results are from a small-scale study at a small university in a small New England town. They are not representative, probably, of the world.
The students were wearing some wearable something? Or how?
No wearables. This is just the phone at this point. Yeah, this first study is just the phone.
How do you get sleep from phone?
You came in late, didn't you? That's the answer to your question. I know him, so I can be facetious. So we can estimate sleep from just phone usage, from looking at the microphone, listening to the microphone, looking at the light sensor, phone usage, and movement, pretty much. So the caveat is this is not generalized results. And there's been quite a lot of research that I won't go into either. So what I'm going to present today is just my own stuff. I'm not, with respect, there's so much work in this area, I'd spend the hour talking just about the related work. So some of the behavioural trends I want to talk about. Well, first of all, Dartmouth, the undergraduate at Dartmouth all live on campus. And there's nothing else for them to do but be on campus, right? Unfortunately, fairly boring. So all their socialisation, where they live, where they go to classes, all in this sort of little enclosed campus. So we know where their dorm is. We know the study areas on campus. We know where we know where the medical health centre is. We know where they eat. We know where they party. At Dartmouth, sadly, all of the parties are in the basements of the fraternities on campus. So all of the illegal drinking parties that the university turns a blind eye to, because they have to, right, are all in the basement of fraternities on Frat Row. So we know where the parties are, we know they're in the parties. And of course, the smartphone is where they go to class, right? I'm being ironic. This is the classroom. Yeah, if you're a teacher, you know that. That's a good icon for being in the classroom. Because kids are all staring at their phones. Of course, we've got all of this information on this campus, and we can look at the semantics of location now, right? Because we can say, oh, you know, in their study areas, are they being focused or are they on their phone, right? We can say, you know, when they're in social spaces, are they in conversation with somebody or not, right? And so this is really interesting, sort of layering on top of different inferences, other inferences, give us a deeper dive into human behaviour. This is, if you were a Dartmouth professor, you would know this off by heart. This is our schedule, all the slots that we teach in across a term. And what this is showing is Monday through Friday and the hours of the day. And these slots are different classes. And the whiter it is, the more of these kids are in that slot, you know? So this is actually the class I taught, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, at 10:05 till 11:00 something. And this is the X hour I had. And you can see all their other classes as well. So this is 70 kids, 48 in the end, all of their classes that they took across the whole term, just on one slide, right? And this is because we could automate attendance. And this is all their sleeping patterns, right? So most of them would go to bed around about midnight, but you have these vampires down here that never go to bed, right? And these are all the so this is all averages across the term for all of the kids. Now I'm going to show you a sequence of quick averages for different variables or different features from the phone. So this is all automatically computed from data from the phone without any input from the user. And I'll show you a time series of a particular variable against the 8-9 week term. This is the midterm period, and this is their deadlines. So this is all the deadlines for all their courses, could be exams, could be homeworks, and that'll be constant. So they come back from spring break, and they don't sleep the first week very much, and they got some sleep, and then they go into the midterm. This is all the kids, and the averages. They sleep less through midterms. They get some sleep before the finals, and then they're not sleeping. This is the number of face-to-face conversations they have and the duration across the whole term. So this is the duration. This is the number of conversations. So they come back from spring break, they're having longer but fewer conversations. I'd argue these are social interactions. And then this flips over just before the midterm period, where now they're actually having shorter but more short conversations. I'd argue this is like stressful encounters, maybe. How are you doing? Fine, leave me alone. And then it sort of, goes to this like nadir and then comes back where they're having more longer conversations after the finals. They are active to about the midterm period and then they stop being very active. And this is my favourite. They go to the gym until the midterm. They stop going. So this is when I start playing squash. Because all the courts are empty. I never play squash during these weeks. So that was 2013. And today we're actually following 200 students across their 4 years at Dartmouth. And we're sort of coming towards the spring term of their second year. And I just want to show you some, this is unpublished data, but it's sort of interesting. So this time I'm going to show you averages again of these 200 students just for their first year across the fall term, then they have a 6-week or 4 to 6 week winter break, then the winter term, then this is spring break, spring term, and then this is the summer. And so this is their studying behaviours across the whole year for 200 students. You see, as the term progresses, they start studying more. They probably do a lot of socialisation the first term, right? They're just new high schoolers, rising high schoolers. And that's the studying trends, where they study. This is their sleep. You can just mull over this. I'm not going to make any sense of it. They're not sleeping. They go home to their parents and they never leave their bedrooms, right? Any of us who have college-age kids, we know this, right? They come out just for food from the bedroom. And this is their partying. We know when they're at the frats, right? When they're partying. So we can see things like, so when they party, what's this? They're not studying so much and they're not sleeping very much. It sort of makes sense, right? When you just hone in on one of the points in the time series. And this is their mobility. And I know actually Gloria's writing a paper with Ted on looking at seasonal adjusted behaviour with the project I mentioned that we're working on together. And this just shows you obvious stuff like, you can see that they're much more mobile in the springtime. We have a lot of snow at Dartmouth, so spend a lot of time indoors in the winter. So that, by the way, all of this here is passive data from the phone that they never interact with, that's computed and visualized for you. This is all, most of this is all from self-reports, but it's quite interesting. So this is the self-esteem. So each week we ask them to self-report a lot of different things. This is their self-esteem. They come in as high schoolers and they feel really good about themselves. Because, they're in the top few percent of their high school. Dartmouth takes 1,000 kids, they get 21,000 applications. So they feel really good about themselves, and then they meet other kids like themselves. And look, their self-esteem just drops off. I don't know if that's the reason. And then it sort of bounces back when they go home to their parents and drops off again to a lower point. Bounces back a little bit, drops off, and then recovers a bit in the summertime whenever they might be doing internships or whatever. And then you see their stress level. Again, their stress level sort of rises, and then they go home to the parents and they de-stress. So you see this cycle. And this is the visits to the health centre. So this is actually during the spring break party season. But anyway, I can't make any sense of any of this right now. We haven't really looked into it in too detail, but it's interesting to just look at this.
You should see flu season there. Flu should
There's probably flu. You might see flu season in that. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Question: was this just for freshmen or the entire student?
This is the 200 students over just the first year. They're all freshmen.
They're all freshmen.
Yeah.
You're doing this over all 4 years.
Yeah, and this is just the first year data. Which
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So again, I'm assuming you have an IRB for doing this.
Oh,
So
yeah.
All 200 agree? Like, how many students do you guys have? And how much?
sure. This is being recorded. Do you think I'd stand here and say, yes, Sharon, I don't have an IRB. I'd be fired at Dartmouth as soon as I got back. Of course I have an IRB.
No, I guess,
Yeah.
does everybody, what's the incoming class size in Dartmouth?
1,000. So we,
I see.
so we have 250. We have a good percentage of the kids. And one thing we're looking at is first-generation kids in this population as well, and risk levels. So 2009, we started getting wearables, the Fitbit. 2014, we had the first Android watch, and then we had, of course, Apple blew the whole market away. And 2015, the reason I show this is the Microsoft band, which we used in a study to look at heart rate and physiological signals. And that study was, after the student life study, I started to get interested in actually, based on the results, could we actually predict depression from mobile sensing data? That was the question. And so we developed a study and we looked at 83. Of course, I've got to say that the N here is really small. It's only 83 students. Now it's across 2 terms, 2 10-week terms in 2016. And we were doing very much using the same technology, but we're using a band now. And at that time, the Microsoft band had an excellent PPG sensor to do heart rate variability. Problem was, you'd have to recharge it overnight, right? It's not very good if you ever have to get into sleep data while people are sleeping. And students filled in a PHQ-8, which is, I'll go through that. It's a simple questionnaire that asks some things about, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by any of the following? Little interest or pleasure in doing things, feeling down and depressed, trouble staying asleep or sleeping too much, lack of energy, etc. And we took out the suicidal ideation question because it's tough unless you're looking at this data for an IRB to put that question in there. And we also, so we asked them to fill out this pre and post, the beginning and the end of the study, and every week we asked them a subset, the first 4 questions, which is a PHQ-4, 2 of the questions are to do with depression and 2 questions to do with anxiety. Because we were interested in what is the ebb and flow of dynamics for depression across a period of time. And this is a correlation matrix of the symptoms for depression. So loss of interest, mood, sleep, basically straight from the PHQ. Fatigue, appetite, worthlessness, ability to concentrate, and psychomotor retardation, which is like, I suppose, fidgeting. And on the y-axis, I'm showing the actual phone features that were the most significant correlates that we found with these symptoms. And so blue is negative correlation, red is positive correlation. And just to mention a few of these, right? So loss of interest was associated, so the symptom loss of interest was associated with the fewer places that you visited, right? So the fewer places you were visited, the more likely that you had, lost that symptom was, that you experienced that symptom. And also the correlate for loss of interest was associated with the usage, screen time in study places, right? Whether I can interpret these or make sense, sort of make sense, but interpret them. Sleep was associated with a bunch of things. For example, trips to the health centre, phone usage, how active you were, again, phone usage in study areas, and thank goodness it was correlated with our inference on sleep itself, sleep duration. Worthlessness was associated with, again, number of places visited and phone usage. The important point here that I took home for this slide, really, to me, is that unlock duration, which is screen time in study places, actually was a correlate for many of these symptoms. Which sort of, it's a bit futuristic to think that could the unlock, the usage of this phone actually be a very strong signal for mental health, right? Just asking that question. But it seems like it is to some degree. So then we actually said, well, can we actually go about predicting the pre and post PHQ-9? So that's not the dynamic one, but just at the beginning and end. And the answer is yes. So we use sort of simple Lazo-regularized linear regression, and the nice thing about to predict the actual outcome. So that's the score. So if you go back to this, kids fill in this, it gets scored between 0 and 24, falls into categories like not depressed, mildly depressed, moderately depressed, severely depressed. And what we're trying to do here is actually predict that number, just using simple linear regressors. And the nice thing about Lazo is that it sets irrelevant features to 0 and leaves the most predictive features. So the most predictive features of predicting depression, pre and post depression, was, again, phone usage, heart rate from the wearable, sleep duration, conversation interaction, distance traveled during the day, and time spent in study areas. And the mean absolute error here was 2.4. To put that into context, it's about 10% error. And of course, you know, the prediction is significant with the outcome. So next, you know, because I've got so many slides and I'm going to run out of time, I'm just going to up the bandwidth if you don't mind. So the other thing we want to do is to look at dynamics of depression throughout those 2 10-week terms. So once a week, we ask the kids to fill out on the phone a PHQ-4. 4 questions, 2 to do with depression, 2 to do with anxiety, and we split the kids into 2 groups, depressed group and non-depressed group. So the depressed group, we said, were in range 3 to 6 from scoring of the PHQ-4, and non-depressed 0 to 2. And so, again, we use sort of a logistical regression here, and this is just the area of the curve, which is 0.8, recall 0.81, and precision 0.69. And so we can actually predict, just by looking at the sensing data, causally if a kid actually falls into the depressed or non-depressed group in a quite accurate way, just from sensing data. And finally, we were interested in the associations between features and the actual predicted outcome of PHQ-4. And we can't use sort of standard linear regressors or correlation analysis for this because of strong correlation. We're asking these kids every week over 20 weeks to give us their scores, and of course it's highly correlated. So we used generalized linear mixed models to understand these associations. I'm not showing the actual values of the index here, but I'm showing the direction. So kids who were more likely depressed had fewer conversations, visited fewer places, went to bed later and slept less. That's the outcome, the take home of the GLMM analysis. Just to show you one cherry-picked example of one student's data just across one term, and it is cherry-picked, but it sort of brings home, you know, the interpretability on some level of what the signals tell us. So up here is this student's PHQ-4, right, which can vary between 0 and 6. 6 is the maximum, right? And so he or she starts the term in an undepressed state, but around week 4 is significantly depressed, based on self-report. And then there's an inflection point, and things get much better, and somehow overcomes this depressive state. We don't know why. Could have they went to CVS, went to see a doctor, fell in love, met a friend, who knows. But if you look at the data before and afterwards, you can see during their recovery, they're sleeping more, they're having more conversational interaction with people, they're going to bed earlier, they're visiting more places. Again, it's cherry-picked, but it's showing you the sort of significance of how behaviours could relate to depression. So one thing I'll share with you, when I first did that student life study, I could look at all the data from all of the students. And I was teaching Android programming, and 2 students just stopped handing in assignments. They didn't drop the class. They just disappeared off the map. And they didn't sit the final exam. So, of course, I mailed them. They never responded to my email. So I looked at their data. And what I saw from their data was that they had very high PHQ scores. And one of them would stay in his or her room all day and walk around campus in the evening. But both of them were giving us the most self-reported data of any of the students in the cohort, right? Which was like, wow. So these are, you know, severely depressed kids, they're not going to any of their classes, but they're on their phones a lot, telling us how they feel. That was actually quite mind-opening. So instead of failing these kids, which I should have, I gave them ongoing grade. Little did I know at the time that Dartmouth students take 3 classes. If you fail 3 classes, you immediately have to leave. You have to leave campus for 1 term. That's how our rules operate. Because I didn't fail these students, they came back in the fall term. One of them was a rising senior. They both completed their exam. They both completed their assignments. They both came to my office. I never once asked them about their health. They never once told me about their health. But the senior graduated. So that's like an ad hoc intervention that I did, probably off the books, you know, probably maybe unethical. But it really brought home the power that, you know, when I sat in the class as a teacher and felt very inept when kids were like dropping out, I started to feel, hey, I actually helped 2 kids here to return to Dartmouth and one of them to graduate. Okay, question. Do you think we can predict GPA from sensing data? Hands in the air. Those people who didn't put their hands in the air, you're wrong. Well, of course, we know their class attendance, we know their studying habits, and we know their partying habits, right? So and we got all their ground truth, right, for their grades. And unfortunately, I could show you a video, but I don't think I've got the audio. So I'll just tell you, as the video is running, I'll tell you a little bit of what we did. Maybe I could do it in sync. It's a shame I love this dude. He was one of the students in the study. I just give him his attention away, sadly. But, so what we actually did was we built a model to actually infer, to try to predict term GPA. And, all right, well, not to be shown. Okay, so without the video, we built a model to predict GPA, and using sort of simple linear regression techniques, and we found that, and we could actually predict GPA within, I think it was 7/100ths of a grade point. So it's pretty accurate prediction of GPA. And the features that we found were associated with high performers were things like associated with conversational interaction during periods of the day, particularly in the evening periods. The amount of activity they were doing, again, looking at different epochs throughout the day, and also some self-reported data. So, for example, they filled out the big five. So conscientious students tended to be high achievers. Okay, so moving on, starting this work looking at students, other people in the clinical community started contacting me and asking me if they could use the student life software in clinical trials. So I got involved with Draw-Ben-Zave to look at whether we could predict psychotic relapse in the population of patients living with schizophrenia. And of course, I mentioned schizophrenia is a particularly difficult mental illness where relapse, when you're having schizophrenia, could mean loss of job, being homeless, incarcerated, or hospital, right? So significant repercussions of relapse. So with Draw-Ben-Zave, we set out to do a randomized control trial, pretty much using the same software that I described early on. And in this case, a randomized control trial had a control arm, which is like a placebo arm, essentially, and the other arm of the study, both had 75 patients in, had the student life app, which we call cross-check in this particular project. And this was at the Zucker's Hillside Hospital in New York City, where these patients were outpatients at the hospital who had actually experienced a relapse in the previous year. They were enrolled randomly into the study, and we followed them for 1 year. We built a system that I'm really proud of. This time, this was a real-time system. It was not like Student Life. We collected data, did analysis. Here, we actually built a system, just to quickly run through it. We collected all the passive sensing data, a lot of EMA data, self-reports. It was uploaded to the cloud. Then we sort of built visualization and daily study adherence that clinicians at the hospital would actually look at on a daily basis. We built a model here that I'll talk about in a minute, called the BPRS model, that actually predicted for schizophrenia something like the depression score for PHQ. And the clinicians would look at this score, and they worked out a bunch of thresholding, and if they felt that the newly computed daily signal went above a certain threshold, they reached out to the patient and tried to see if there was a match in their increased concerns from the system with what their lives were like, right? And these are the types of questions that they self-reported 3 times a week. You know, have you been feeling calm? Have you been social? Have you been bothered by voices? Have you been seeing things? Have you been feeling stressed? Have you been worried about people harming you? Have you been sleeping well? Have you been able to think clearly? Have you been depressed? Have you been hopeful? You can get a sense of, like, you know, the difficulty of these people's lives from just these questions that they're responding to. And so the first part of this work was, you know, could we predict the EMA scores that they're giving us 3 times a week, right? And the punchline is, just because I'm running out of time, is yes, we can do that. The first part of this was actually to use dimensional reduction techniques to look at all of the EMA associated with each user. And this is using sort of stochastic neighborhood embedding. And these are individuals on these 2D planes. These are individuals' data associated with, sorry, these are individuals' EMAs associated with a single individual. So this gave us a sense that n equals 1 models would work really well here. And over here on the right, we just showed you results from a gradient boosted regression tree trying to predict the EMA scores. And the take home here is, like, leave one out, models fail, but individual models where we train the model on the data of a particular participant do quite well with a sort of error of about 7%. So BPRS, which is what this is, BPRS is a clinically filled-in survey. When they come in once every 3 months, the clinician fills this out, and this instrument is associated with symptoms like grandiosity, superstitiousness, hallucinations, useful thoughts, conceptual disorganization. It captures this. This distribution here shows you all of the participants, 75 that were in the smartphone arm of our randomized control test. And we could predict the BPRS. We ran 3 different models. Can we predict the BPRS just using the EMA? Yes. Can we just do it from sensing? Yes. Can we get better performance from sensing and EMA? Yes. And basically the take home here is sensing, actually, without going into the figures, unfortunately because I'm running out of time, does not as well as with EMA, but it does well enough. Again, it's about sort of like an 8% error rate to predict the BPRS. And so that was used to, for the clinicians at the Zucker Hillside Hospital to reach out to participants to find out what was going on in their lives. And this shows just 2 particular users. And it gives you some insights into what sensing data can say about relapse, even though the take-home here is we actually couldn't predict relapse, and I'll come to that in a moment. So this is one patient over here. This is the complete year, the days, and this is the EMA scores. So a low EMA score, high EMA score is healthy, a low EMA score is rising concern. So, and the blue bit here is when they're hospitalized. This is when the relapse occurs, right? So here, like, the EMA really is an indicator of what's happening. This user here on the right, the EMA is no indicator, right? Here's their relapse, around about 200 days into the study, RCT. If you look down here, here is the, what is this? Speech duration. If you look at speech duration, you see variability before, you don't see anything particularly significant. But if you look here at the frequency of conversations that are going on, significantly spikes a few weeks before the relapse. And this could be voices, then responding to voices, we don't know that, right? Over here, if you look at, this is the unlock duration between midnight and 6 a.m. You don't see it, you see variability, but again, nothing significant. Sorry, down here, I'm wrong actually. Down here you see unlock duration for the full day, and you don't see anything particularly interesting. But if you look at unlock duration or screen time between midnight and 6 a.m., you see this significant change here before the relapse. Again, we don't know if those actually drove the relapse, but they are showing you what the take home here is. There's a lot of variability between different participants if you're trying to do modeling to predict relapse. And in fact, we couldn't predict relapse. And the reason I think we couldn't predict relapse is because the study was underpowered. Okay, I'm seriously running out of time. So I'll take a few minutes, just a couple of minutes to finish up. We're running this current study, 200 kids over 4 years. And the interesting thing about this study is we're using brain imaging of the students 3 times a year. In one study, we're collecting wearable data, and phone data, and self-reports. And an initial result from this study, just to give you some sense of like the future work that we're doing, is we wanted to ask ourselves a question: is there a connection between functional connectivity between brain regions and the mobile sensing data that's in your pocket and your phone? And we particularly looked at the 2 regions that are associated with depression and anxiety. That's the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. I needed a drink to be able to say that for the first time. And the amygdala, these 2 regions. And the basic take home is if there is a strong, this is resting state functional connectivity. If there's stronger resting state functional connectivity, then there's lower anxiety and depression, and vice versa. That's in the clinical literature. And what we did was we split the data between high and low in terms of functional connectivity between these regions. And we asked ourselves the question, could sensing data bin a kid into the high or low functional connectivity bins? And the quick answer is yes, we could. And we could do it reasonably accurately. And the predictive features there to do this were, again, conversation, sleep, and unlocks. Okay, wrap up. Should have wrapped up 5 minutes ago, but here we go. This is the future part. I think it's an interesting time to think about mental health, mobile sensing, deep learning, and intervention, and what's going to be happening over the next 3 years. Caveat here is this is all just predictions. I think initially we've had a number of small-scale studies in the United States and across the world that have used mobile sensing to try to get handles on what are features that are predictive, are there any models that can generalize across a population? And I would argue that we're not anywhere close to that yet. So there's a real need for a number of more RCTs, and it's been really small. We need sort of larger longitudinal studies to get to sort of like a generalized population, not Ivy Leaguers, for example. We need to be able to replicate results between, so would the Dartmouth study also work here at UCI? We need diverse populations. We need clinical validity before any of this gets adopted. And there's no real consensus right now on what features or models really are more generalizable. And of course, if we go to deep learning, we can hit into issues of interpretability and generalized model. So the take home here is we need to nail this before we scale it, right? And of course, this is a huge mountain to climb, and I'm very, because this is to do with mental health, people's mental health, I'm sort of very reluctant to sort of overclaim anything here, so I like to say that my results are specific to the small-scale studies that we've done. But today there has been progress. We've made some leap forwards, we're doing these sort of like medium-sized studies, but still, as I say, there's been no generalizable results, there's no widely accepted open source passive sensing tools. Many people are using different tools in different communities, it's hard to compare things. And without real validity of a signal, we can't drive an intervention. This is an important point. We have to have super confidence in a depression signal before we can drive an intervention to tell somebody, hey, you're depressed. That's very different from my watch telling me to get up and walk around because I've been, sitting around for the past few hours. And interventions really haven't really gone beyond CPT on the phone right now. There's been little startup success, but there is sort of, and it's a complex healthcare system. So I think by 2025, I think we'll have made some serious progress. I know here at UCLA there's this grand challenge, the Depression Grand Challenge, where they're looking at 100,000 potential users to understand depression, and they're using the AWARE framework that Annie and others developed. That's going to happen, I believe, by 2025. I think we'll have personalised health. We'll have personalised mental health sensing and intervention. By then, people have worked out how to do that. And I think that also there's going to be a lot of deep pipelines on every device imaginable. That will give us a lot of fidelity, assuming that we can solve the interpretability problem. And finally, by 2030, I think always-on mobile mental health API will keep you healthy. I'd imagine within 10 years, we'll get to that point. Okay. Wow, I've only got 1 minute and no time for questions. How perfect. These are all the people that I'd like to thank. We've written, if you're interested in any of this stuff, we've written a bunch of papers over the last 7 years, all published at UBCOM. We like UBCOM. Thanks for listening. And if you remember anything from my talk today, first, you've got to nail it before you scale it. Whatever area of research you're in, if you're a systems person, a modeling person, you have to nail it before you scale it. And finally, I think by 2030, I think mental health will be as easy as this. Oh. Thank you. Sorry, I've got 1 minute for questions.
Oh, I think you can.
Oh, right. I will take questions, but if you have to go, I will not be offended.
Just the CBT on the phone, was that cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yes.
Or, okay.
So my point there was, intervention is super necessary to make advances here because prediction alone, what is the value of that, right? And but that can only be driven by a lot of sort of clinical validity in the signal itself. And when I look at intervention, it seems that CBT on the phone today is what we have. So how do people who do intervention research, and there's plenty of people in the school that do that, how do they advance this field?
So you talked about how to kind of understand the well-being of mental health, but my question is that possible with models to predict, or do you take the stages of especially depression, because when it gets to the earlier stages, it can be prevented, or until the time that it gets really hard to kind of that's the time that someone would seek professional psychologist.
Yeah.
So is there a possibility to understand the transition between these stages? And if yes, what are your thoughts about it?
I think it's a great question and also great idea. So great question, great idea. Definitely if we think, I was chatting to somebody today about this, if you think about stress, and stress is not a clinical outcome, right? But you can be stressed in the morning and you can feel no stress in the afternoon, right? Depression or bipolar, the timescales of manic to depressive or vice versa, or even in depression are very, very, very different, right? Both sort of different on an individual basis and different between illnesses. But you're right, if there's a way to understand rising risk, right, if I want to just say that, rising risk, some red flag, then that would be particularly good. And my feeling is that probably the best thing to do is not to try to predict a score like we did with PHQ-8 or PHQ-4, but to actually try to predict specific symptoms. So certainly imagine if the variability of your sleep changes radically, but there's been nothing in your, you don't have an exam coming up as a student, right? Then that would be, rise to concern, or fatigue levels, or activity levels, or using clustering with location, and suddenly you were out and about, and suddenly now you're not. So I think the key thing is mobile sensing data, whether the signal is a bit erroneous and not accurate. If you can look at the rate of changes of different signals, that in itself could be a great way to drive that first stage, rising risk. So, first question.
A quick question about sleep. The sleep data you have, it's only nocturnal sleep, the night sleep, or does it also contain some nap behavior? Right.
So, people who wear phones, right, you're getting much better. I mean, this is a Rolls Royce, and the phone is a crappy, broken down Mini when it comes to sleep, right? So, our algorithm will only choose the longest sleep period of a day it sees. So if it sees 2, it will only show 1, right? Whereas, my watch knows REM and everything deeply, right? But, the question is, we're seeing an uptick in the penetration of wearables as the prices come down and the sensors go up, but everyone has a phone. That's the advantage.
Social sciences know all sorts of unintended reactions of subjects to experiments.
Yes.
Like trying to please the experimenter, trying to manage certain expression. On the other hand, there's reactance, so creating actions that thwart the experiment. Did you notice anything in this regard, and how can you protect yourself if you noticed?
So you're talking about during experiment, how a user might respond, or
right, yeah, or might want to show behaviors, go to bed early, be in study places, just to create.
So sort of game the system somehow, right?
Well, they game the system,
but not necessarily game it,
not
but
necessarily intentionally. Well, possibly not even consciously.
I don't have an answer to that, but it's a good thought, because I've always thought about the bias of self-report, of course, which is well known, right? The bias or burden of it. But just thinking out,
mischievous.
Right. to me, there was little to gain from doing that. You know, we were not providing incentives for that sort of behaviour. So I doubt it with the student population, and definitely probably not for the patients who had, you know, psychosis. Yeah.
You mentioned that the AI is still a little far away from being able to do an intervention on its own.
Right.
But what about flagging a user for a healthcare provider in real time?
Right.
When they detect the signs.
Right. So, you know, that's another good question, which is, if you had this signal, then how would you use it, right? And my sense is that, first of all, you have to give that sort of control to the user, whether they want to, you know, send a signal to their best friend or clinician or their mother, you know. So I think, you know, I mean, when you think of healthcare, then naturally you think a clinician would be the person who would get the signal. But I think it's like all in the program, probably. Yeah.
Hi. So there's still a large part of the mental health population who don't have access to smartphones and smart devices.
Yeah.
So how can that help with the future intervention of these mental health services and interventions like you mentioned?
Right. Thanks for that question. So when I went into the, well, you know, like almost, and this says something about the demographic, almost all Dartmouth students in 2013, actually about 90% of them had iPhones, you know. But when we did the study in New York City with the patients with psychosis, like only a few of them had their own phones, very few of them. So we gave them the phone, and we gave them an unlimited data plan. And we weren't even quite sure, you know, there were some sort of detractors who thought, oh, these people couldn't even, you know, use a phone or fill in self-reports and things like this. We didn't find that, got actually very good compliance. But your question really is to do with how do you, you know, so the cool thing about this work, I think, is, and the one reason why I'm sort of excited about it, is that if you're fortunate to live in an area where you have access to mental health services, you are so fortunate, right? And even if you have access to it, like take my brother, for example, he wouldn't take his medication, he wouldn't go and see, you know, we were from, you know, a caring sort of family who tried to get those services for him. There was a resistance to doing that. But, the good part of the story of my brother, he went back to King's College London and got a degree in computer science. So I didn't tell that bit. But, you know, so it's a complex situation where if you are fortunate enough to live in an area where you can get access and you will go, then you can get good care, hopefully, right? But let's say I live in Vermont, and there are parts of Vermont that are extremely impoverished, right? And there's no behavioural clinic in this region. There's no therapists, right? And these people couldn't afford it even if they, you know, could, right? So how do you get to that population? I think the only way to get to that population is through mobile technology. And the final thing is, even if you're fortunate to actually have access to mental health services, and you see your therapist or clinician once a month or once every 2 weeks, then what's happening in between? And again, I think mobile technology can fill the gap and fill in, even if you have actually access to it. So it's a long way of I don't have an answer to you in terms of if you have no access to mobile technology. Maybe Medicare should give everyone a phone. I don't know. Yeah. It's a great question, thank you.
Okay, well, we can't have you leave without giving you a gift.
Thank you. And the weather is a gift enough.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.